Hi, I'm going to show you how to do a ladder stitch on your mix critter. Say you've got a bat or a dog or a cat that has a kind of floppy head because you've really loved on it, or it's been washed, it's been smooshed, you've had it in your pocket, you've been carting it around because it's a good time, and its little head is getting a little floppy. Okay, so ladder stitch. This is a real basic piece of cotton. It's a quilter's type cotton, but it'll help us demonstrate what we're trying to do really easily. So when we are working on a repair, I like to create a lock stitch. So I'm just going to go through the beginning. I'm going to make my lock stitch first. So it's a tiny little, I'm taking a tiny little bite, just itty bitty little tiny bite. I'm going to pull my thread through all the way to the end, but I'm not going to pull it real snugly or anything. And I'm going to go through again right there, try and come out right next to it. And there, it's locked, and it's not going to, that knot provided, like say we're using regular thread, regular old thread, a little knot will pull right through our polar fleece of our critter. The critters are made of fleece and fur, and so it's a real open weave or knit, and our threads will often pull through. So if we are really delicate about that first stitch and do a lock stitch, then we will have a greater chance of that holding, right? From here, I'm going to go down perpendicular to where my thread has come out. I'll go down. I'm going to make, just for the sake of example, I'm going to go way down. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to have 3/8 of an inch, I guess, and up perpendicular, over. I'm doing this with two hands for demonstration purposes, but I can do this one-handed. I guess I'm using both hands. But the ladder stitch, you can see that I'm starting to have a ladder. Rung, rung, rung. And I'm gonna show you, let's say what if my grip isn't working so great on my needle, or the fabric it's hard to push through, it's hard to pull through, and my fingers aren't really grippy, or they're really rough and everything I touch is getting munged up. I have a pair of pliers that I will use. These have a spring in them, so they're not hard for my hands to use, and I can push my needle through, pull my needle through, use the tool to help my hands on that fine work. I have a pair of hemostats that I will also use to sew with. And this is important when you've got maybe there's a seam and you're trying to push your needle through several layers of fabric, and it's really difficult, or your grip strength isn't there. This happens to me where my thumb is really crampy, say I'm cold, whatever, for whatever reason, gripping the needle is challenging. I will use the hemostats to push and pull my needle. Before I got the hemostats, I used these little needle nose pliers, and it was enough to help me push and pull my needle through the fabric. And maybe you need to use a thimble. This one is one I've had 1,000 years. I've been using it for quilting. My hands are pretty calloused now, so I typically don't use thimbles, but they can be very useful in helping you push with the side of your finger. And the way I sew, I am pushing with the side of my finger through. See if I can demonstrate that more closely. But say you don't have a thimble. I have an old pair of gloves that I snipped the finger off of, and I reinforced the seams, and I did have to use tools to be able to sew the seam of my leather thimble. But this is from a pair of old buckskin gloves that I inherited, Again, I'm gonna use the side of my finger to push. And in this case, I could even use the seam. But so you don't want to cut up a pair of gloves. You could put on a pair of leather gloves and sew using those gloves to get the grip that you need. So as you can see, I've got a pretty clumsy looking ladder stitch here. I'm going to keep going just to demonstrate that I can use both hands to do this, or I could see if I need to pull this through a little bit. And it is a little tiny bit tricky to pull through this fabric. So here's my ladder. And why this works for joining the head and body of our critters, and why this is going to work to help squinch up the floppy neck and for your repair, is because when we pull this tight, it's going to pull this fabric together. See that? So that is the ladder stitch and how it works. So let's go to our repair. I'm looking at this through the viewfinder, and I'm a little bit hard of seeing, so this ought to be a little bit interesting. So I have my needle already threaded, and I'm using bright pink so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, so just a regular old needle, doesn't have to be particular. This one's got a nice bend in it already because I am pretty assertive with my, I sew hardcore. Let's see, pull some knots out. Guess we have a knot, huh? Okay, so there it is, we have a knot. My pink thread. I'm gonna move my doggo out of the way here because he's kind of in my way. So what I like to do is find a seam where I can insert my lock stitch. And I like to do it to a seam because the stitching from my machine is a nice tight little spot, and I tend to like to start on the sides. I want to hide my knots in seams coming and like in the beginning and in the end. So come up close, see if I can see. This is kind of weird. All right, so can you see the little seam right there? I'm going to put my needle in. So the object of the operation here is say the head is a little floppy on the body, and we want to squinch the two pieces together to reduce floppiness. Gotcha? Okay, so I'm going to put in my first little lock stitch. Just take a tiny bite. I'm going in through a seam. I'm going to take a tiny, tiny little bite there. Oh, I pulled right through. Dang it. Okay, that's exactly why we're doing this. Okay, so maybe I come in from the other side. Take a tiny, 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 tiny little stitch. Try not to pull too hard. There's my dumb little knot. Ugh. I'm gonna go in right next to it. I'm just gonna make a tiny little loop right there. Lock stitch, boom. Okay, so I'm gonna go down, take my first stitch down in the, right there. Go through. I'm gonna go up to the head, take a stitch, pull through. See that? You see what we're doing there? Okay, so there's my stitch, go over a little bit, boom, take a bite, pull through. You can see this is why this is called a ladder stitch, because it's starting to look like a ladder. Go up to the head, down to the body. And you can see that these aren't particularly delicate little stitches. I'm really, boom. Okay, so a little bite, up to the head, little bite. And you can see my ladder, yeah? And when I pull this thread, it'll just, boom, squinch it all down. So I've just taken up, because I've been taking a 1/4 inch up here and a 1/4 inch down here, when I pull it tight, I've taken up 1/2 inch of floppiness. So I'm gonna move on ahead here, and I'll talk about the knot when we finish it, when I get all the way around. Okay. So again, I'm going just around. I'm not being particularly exacting, or delicate. I'm not taking the tiniest little stitches. Okay, now we're almost back to where we started. Yeah, we're on this side seam, and so I'm going to go through. I'm going to take my last few stitches. I'm pulling it, so snugging that little head on. Okay, so last stitches. So I'm going to show you how I do like the final. I start with a lock stitch and I'm going to end with a lock stitch, and then I'm going to show you how I tie my knot. So I've got this pulled snug so I can't see any of my ladder stitches. I can't see my thread. Everything's looking good there. I've got this pulled kind of tight. Here's my needle. I'm going to go in at approximately, let's see, so it's in a top, it's coming out on the head. So I'm going to go in through the shoulder and try and come back out in the same place that thread already is. I'm just making a little lock stitch. Boom. I'm going to do it again. Same thing. Go in through the shoulder, try and come back out where that thread is. This time I'm going to give some tension on my needle with my thumb. I'm going to pick up my tail, the long end, and I'm going to wrap it around my needle once, twice, 3 times. And then I'm going to push my needle through, pull it through, let that get secure, kind of snug, snug, snug. Now I have tied a knot. I'm going to take my needle, I'm going to push it in right at that point. I'm going to go all the way through the other side. There it is. Pull it out, and that puts the long tail of that knot inside the body. And the reason I'm doing that is so that if like this gets snagged on something, it's not going to pull the knot out. So I happen to have some scissors standing by, so I'm just going to snip that off. So my little kitty has had its head tightened onto its body. So, So I found a bat so I can show you why this would happen and why we would need to be able to do this repair at all. The bats have a little bit of a neck. They have more of a neck than, say, the dog or a bunny or a cat. And the stuffing can get a little bit compacted in this area just through its normal life. And so we can take up a little bit of that floppiness by squinching using that ladder stitch to make it less floppy. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that on this particular bat before I even put it up for sale. So I'm hoping that my very long-winded ladder stitch demonstration was useful. I'm not going to ask you to like or subscribe because I don't make videos often enough to encourage such a thing. But I do hope that it was useful and that you are now empowered to make repairs on your mix kit or toys or anything. Have a great day and go make stuff.